JETRO and the Consulate General and the Embassy of Japan for hosting the event today. And then Ralph, who really was behind the whole thing, I think he needs to be called back because he's ready. You know, last time he was running with a robot, you remember?
Yes.
I couldn't catch him. The robot was faster than him. Ralph, it's all you.
Actually, when we were here last time, we brought a seal robot made in Japan, and that seal robot loved Dr. De Silva's wife a lot.
He has good taste.
Exactly right. We'd like to introduce Rodney Tefteris-Jack, Kansas Department of Commerce, who will introduce our speakers for tonight. Rodney.
I'm Rondi Tefteris-Jack. I'm with the Kansas Department of Commerce. I oversee our international trade and investment activities. So it's a great honor for me to be here with our partners and longtime friends from JETRO and the Consulate General in Chicago and from the Embassy of Japan. We really appreciate you being here, and we're excited about the opportunity to talk about Japan and Midwest and what's going on between the two countries and TPP and some other things. Japan is a very important partner for Kansas. It's typically number 3 or 4. It's among the very top export markets for Kansas products. Some of you here in this room have been selling to Japan for many years. You know the importance of that market. It's also an important investor for Kansas. We have a number of Japanese companies that have invested here and created jobs. United Instruments of Tokyo Aircraft Instruments is represented here tonight. Takako Industries in Hutchinson, affiliated with KYB, celebrated their 25th anniversary in Kansas last year by expanding and investing more and creating more jobs in Kansas. So we have a lot of examples of that. We even have a couple of wind farms that are partially owned by Sumitomo Corporation. So really important to the Kansas economy. So we're excited to have the opportunity to be here. I have the honor tonight of introducing Mr. Sone and Minister Kuroda. I'm going to start with Mr. Sone, who will speak first. He is the Chief Executive Director of the Chicago office of the Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO. He's been in that position since June of 2013 and oversees JETRO Chicago's activities designed to facilitate trade and investment between Japan and the 12 Midwestern states that his office serves. And so we've had a long-term relationship with JETRO Chicago, and they do a great job of getting out to all of the states in their region. Mr. Sone has a very deep background in promoting trade between the U.S. and Japan. He started out, though, interestingly, with a degree from Doshisha University in Kyoto in art, and specializing in art history and museum studies. He also earned a museum curator certificate from Japan's Ministry of Education. So I thought that was a very interesting background, but in fact, when he graduated, he joined JETRO, and his first assignment was to coordinate JETRO's participation in trade exhibitions around the world, which obviously gave him a good background because they then sent him for several U.S. assignments, first to the JETRO Los Angeles office, where he worked with the Southwest U.S. states. He went back to Japan and worked for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but in the North America bureaus, so still focusing on this part of the world, and then came back to the JETRO San Francisco office for a period of time as well. So he's had a lot of experience in the U.S. and now obviously is based in Chicago. Just prior to that position, he was actually serving as the director of the Overseas Offices Division, where he was managing JETRO's 70 worldwide offices, and so really a big responsibility in covering all of those, and was also involved in a restructuring to help them focus not just on developed countries but also on emerging economies. So they're really trying to respond to what's the changes in the world and be very active in promoting trade and investment between the U.S. and Japan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Sone to give an introduction this evening.
Well, thank you, Randy, for a very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today and giving me this opportunity to speak in front of you. I'd like to speak about Kansas-Japan business partnership. So before talking about Japanese companies in the US, let's see the trade relationship with Japan. Japan is fourth largest trading partner for the United States, a very important trading partner. And for Japan as well, the United States is still very important trading partner. You probably remember well, back in the 80s and 90s, Japan had a huge trade surplus with the United States and other countries. But now, Japan has a trade deficit to the world. Can you believe that? And why? Japan has fully opened its market to foreign imports as third largest economy in the world. And Japan has shifted production to the United States and other countries. For example, 78% of the Japanese brand cars sold in the United States are made in North America. And for the investment side, Japan is #1 foreign investor in the United States. They are contributing to the US economy quite a bit. And in the Midwest, Japanese investment is especially significant because many of them are manufacturers or suppliers. So they run factories and employ people. There are 2,200 Japanese affiliates in Midwest, and they employ over 240,000 people. And in Kansas, the number is growing every year. This is very important data by American government to show the importance of Japanese investment. Japanese affiliates represent 4.4% out of the total US export to the world. Japanese affiliates are dominant compared to other foreign affiliates. Well, people talk about, for example, a lot about investment from China, but you know, for Chinese investment contribute still 0.1%. So you know how much Japanese companies are contributing, and this trend continues, and it's actually increasing. For example, now Honda export more to the world than importing from Japan, and Toyota's export is increasing drastically for the past 5 years. It's been doubled. The export from the United States to the world. And this is a recent Japanese greenfield investment data. And Kansas has two companies, that is Sekisui Chemical and Kuroda Tractor. Automotive is still strong, but the Japanese investment has been diversified in terms of the industry. For example, chemical related recently, and also like service industry or food related, because Japanese food really popular now. Now I'd like to talk about your business opportunities in Japan. You may still think that everything is expensive in Japan, but that's not true anymore. High cost is not a major obstacle. For example, office rent or housing rent, Tokyo is not too expensive compared to the major cities in Asia, like Hong Kong, Singapore, and others. And the payrolls too, the managers or these payroll level is not necessarily too high compared to other nations. Japan can offer 3 windows for business. Number 1, as you can guess, innovation hub. And number 2, Japan is a huge market as 3rd largest economy in the world. And also trendsetter, especially in Asia. Asian countries are looking at Japan's culture, fashion, and trends. And number 3, we provide world-class business platform with comfortable living and great food. Japan leads the world in Michelin 3-star restaurants. We have 28 in France, 27. Do you know how many in the United States? 10. So Japan is you know, the best in the food. And of course, Japan is one of the safest country in the world. And these are the, according to our survey, the things that I mentioned, same thing, the reason why they come to Japan to do business. And actually, you can check this chart later, but foreign companies are doing quite well in Japan. Japan has population is aging, but not necessarily that's bad, because pharmaceutical companies or insurance companies, American companies are doing pretty great. And of course, for US business, Japan is a gateway to Asia. I believe that both Japan and the United States, especially Midwest, are the centers of advanced manufacturing. So to be competitive in a global market, you have to work with Japanese companies, both in the Midwest and in Japan. Japanese companies and US companies are so interdependent now. I'll give you some examples. 35% of the Boeing's 787 Dreamliners components and 50% of the iPhones components are supplied by the Japanese companies. That's why these excellent Midwest companies like Boeing, Caterpillar, and Molex, they have a very strong commitment in the Japanese market. And we recently did an event to introduce Japanese innovative and technology companies to Fiat Chrysler Automotive in Michigan with their strong request. As you know, automobiles is changing quite a bit, like electric vehicle or autonomous, so they need to work with Japanese suppliers. For example, Boeing, their 787's huge wings are produced by the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in Nagoya, Japan, and they ship that to the United States for assembly. And the Caterpillar, they have a R&D headquarters in Japan for hydraulic excavator, and they have their mother plant in Japan, and they export that huge hydraulic excavator from Japan to the world. And the Molex, that's an Illinois company, they produce like a connector for the smartphones. They have a global headquarters for micro product in Japan. And their executive said that only Japanese can produce such micro products. And of course, Japan is a country of innovation. And these suppliers, very strong supplier base. So not just in Midwest, you have to be in Japan to work with them. And of course, as an industrialized nation, Japan and the US share the common values. We share the common values on dedication to democracy, free trade, and rules of law, including intellectual property. And number two, and on top of that, there's a trust and a kizuna, bond of friendship, underlying relationship between Japan and the Midwest, based on the common values on work ethics, such as hardworking, honesty, modesty, and so on, as these governors in the Midwest emphasize. And the other reason is now is a good time to do business in Japan, because Japanese government welcomes foreign investment. The government has set a very challenging goal. We have to double the foreign direct investment by Tokyo Olympics year 2020. And actually, foreign companies, US investment in Japan is increasing. Our organization, JETRO, has assisted about 370 American companies successfully setting up their operation in Japan and expanding in Japan for the past 12 years. We welcome basically any kind of industry. And these are the success cases we have assisted. We like to see more companies from Kansas or Wichita. And we have good incentives in these high-tech areas. Now I'd like to briefly touch on Great East Japan earthquake. It was March 11th on 2011. We had a Great East Japan earthquake, and it's been 5 years already. Almost 20,000 people perished, and still 2,500 people are missing. And these three prefectures, Iwate and Miyagi and Fukushima, it's their so-called recovery area. The area is part of a Tohoku region. I'd like to express gratitude to the people of Kansas for your kind and generous support after the earthquake. And the United States Armed Forces worked so hard to help clear mud and debris so that Sendai Airport could reopen only after 1 month. Thank you, and thank you very much. The number of evacuees has decreased from 470,000 to 174,000, but still quite a big number. Much of the infrastructure has recovered after 5 years, and the industrial production indices recovered to the pre-earthquake level. Recovery efforts are well underway, but still lots of things to work on, and takes a long time. I'd like to briefly touch on the situation in Fukushima, because we have heard about a lot about Fukushima. Decontamination efforts continues, and evacuation orders have been released area by area. These red area are the actual area under the evacuation order. When US media reports on Fukushima situation, they just say Fukushima. But please know that actual area under evacuation order is quite limited area, a limited part of Fukushima. People in Fukushima have been suffering with damage caused by harmful rumors and misinformation. So I'd like you to know the truth. Radiation level in most part of Fukushima is now at the same level as the major cities in Europe and the United States. And they're confident that food and agriculture products from Fukushima are the safest in Japan, because all of the agri products radiation levels are measured and inspected. Two key industries for the future, it's renewable energy and life science. Fukushima has a target to produce enough renewable energy to supply 100% of the energy demand in the prefecture by year 2040. They are actively working on mega solar, wind farm, biomass, and geothermal projects. So if you're with these industries, Tohoku is a great place to start in Japan with your business with good incentives. I'd like to touch on the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant situation. For the completion of decommissioning, it would take like 30 to 40 years. The world has had very few serious nuclear accidents. Before Fukushima, of course, Chernobyl in 1986, 3 Mile Island in 1979, and Windscale in UK 1957. But all of these plants have not been decommissioned yet. A speaker at our previous seminar representing a US nuclear remote robotics system company working at Fukushima Daiichi said, the fact that the workers at Fukushima have already defueled reactor 4 is amazing. The work being done at Fukushima is actually moving at an accelerated pace, and this is a great achievement. So things are moving quite well. And this is the situation about nuclear power plants in Japan. So after the new regulation, they are inspecting whole nuclear power plants and reopening gradually. And actually, there's massive deregulations going on in the Japanese energy sector. So there's more business chance. So that is my presentation. Our organization, JETRO, our mission is to help facilitate business between Japan and the rest of the world, and of course, United States. So we are based in Chicago, so anything related to the business with Japan, please contact us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Sone. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Kuroda, who is the Minister for Economy, Trade, Industry, and Energy at the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C., a position he's held just briefly since August of last year. But prior to that position, he was Director of Americas Division in the Trade Policy Bureau at the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, known as METI. So he has a significant background in this area and has been involved in various efforts to strengthen U.S.-Japan relationships, including taking an active role as a negotiator for TPP and also being involved with U.S.-Japan energy cooperation and working with Prime Minister Abe's recent visit to the U.S. So a lot of experience in the areas that he's going to be speaking about this evening. Mr. Kuroda actually joined the Ministry of METI, at the time called the International Trade and Industry Ministry, in 1990. So he has a long experience with that organization and has worked on a variety of trade and economic issues, including working with the World Trade Organization. He also served on the Cabinet Affairs Office of the Cabinet Secretariat, the Prime Minister's Office, and even has some JETRO experience as the New York Office Director for JETRO for several years, from 2007 to 2010. So a lot of experience in U.S. and Japan trade relations, in the TPP and free trade agreements. So it'll be very interesting to hear from him this evening. I did save the most important piece of information for last. Mr. Kuroda has a Bachelor of Arts in Law from the University of Tokyo, but more importantly has a Master's of Public Policy from Duke University. So I'm thinking that it might be best for Kansas-Japan relations if we don't talk about basketball this evening.
Well, thank you, Randy, for the kind introduction. I thought I'd keep the secret of my Duke University background, as we may face at some point. On that occasion, I will root for Duke University. But I'm delighted to be here in Wichita, Kansas today. This is my second time to come to Wichita. The first time we was last night. When I went to Kansas City, I was diverted to Wichita and get refuel, and then went back to Kansas City. And then today, we drove up to here, so this is my second time. Coincidentally, I have a cousin. She's Japanese, but she's married to an American, and he is now teaching at the University of Kansas about Japanese cinema, movie, and Japanese culture. And I could see them last night. So I'd like to really thank for this opportunity. Today, I'd like to address 3 questions. First question is, does Japan matter? The second question is TPP a good thing for us? And the third question is, Japan and the United States fighting a trade war still? Let me go to the first question. Does Japan matter? My answer is yes, it does. May I ask how many people have been to Japan? Can you raise hand? Do you know the name of Prime Minister of Japan? So, current Prime Minister, Mr. Abe, came into the office about 3 years ago. And before that, our DPJ is a different opposition party. Current opposition party was in power. So when Prime Minister Abe came into the office 3 years ago, it was his second time to serve as the Prime Minister. So he knew something about how to manage the country, and he has many bold agenda. But economy is and has been one of his top priority. So until he came into the office, Japan has been in a deflationary economic situation. We are still halfway, but we feel that we are at least out of the deflationary situation. Still, we are aiming for the 2% target of inflation. We are struggling. Our economy, Japanese economy, grew 0.5% last year. The last quarter of last year, fourth quarter, it didn't grow. The annualized growth rate was negative 1.1%. However, we expect this year, 2016, Japanese economy grow at rate of somewhat between 1% and 2%, probably around 1.5%. We are seeing mixed signals, positive signals. Japanese unemployment rate has been very low. The latest figure is 3.2% last December, which is quite low even by the Japanese standard. Corporate benefit, record high in 2014, probably record high or near record high last year, 2015. A lot of challenges. Consumption has been very moderate or weak. Wages has been stagnant. Investment by companies are very moderate, even though they are getting a lot of benefit. And also we are paying close attention to external risks, such as the slowing down of emerging economies, including China, or a very volatile market situation, including oil prices. So again, against this background, government of Japan is making every effort to create a business environment, business-friendly environment, so that business can increase wages and make more investment. We are using all available tools, including fiscal policy, monetary policy, pro-growth policy packages, including difficult structural reforms. And we will continue to these reforms, including improvement of corporate governance, pro-growth corporate tax reforms, creating more job opportunities for women, deregulations in areas like agriculture, healthcare, and energy. Sone-san briefly mentioned the energy areas, but I'd like to highlight because this is very timely. So Japanese electricity market has been divided by region, and each region has been monopolized by a virtually integrated electric utilities. So that system worked very well in the past. However, especially after the nuclear accident Sone-san mentioned, we have been faced energy constraints such as the huge increase of energy cost. So in order to overcome this and to realize stable and reasonable electricity supply, we have been tackling very bold, drastic reforms of electricity market for the first time in 60 years. We are taking three-step approaches. First, we established an entity which coordinate cross-regional facilitate cross-regional coordination of transmission and distribution. And the second stage is a full retail competition or liberalization. And the final stage is a legal unbundling of transmission distribution of electricity. So this April, in a matter of 2 weeks, the second stage, full retail liberalization, will be launched. This means currently regulated $67 billion market will open up. And we certainly welcome all the ideas, the investment from overseas. So we are hoping that through those new entries from different industries, different countries, and also competition among electric utilities, it will reduce cost for users of electricity, which will lead to more competitiveness of business, and also which will require electric utilities to lower their cost of purchase for resources, and then lead to innovation, more innovation to face new challenges. So this is just one of the examples that current administration has been and will continue to tackle difficult and bold structural reforms if it's necessary. In its context, I'd like to note that Japan hosts G7 summit meeting this May. Prime Minister Abe, current Prime Minister, strongly believes that G7 countries should take the initiative to promote world economic growth. So he is now currently talking to very famous scholars, economists, some from the United States, himself, and try to think through what we can do. And closely cooperating with the United States government, we will try to send a very strong signal from G7 summit meeting for the world economic growth. So please stay tuned. So this is the reason why Japan is very important. Second, I'd like to talk about TPP. Is TPP good things for us? Before coming here, I was myself directly involved in TPP negotiation. I was a negotiator for one of the many chapters of TPP. It's called TBT, the Technical Barriers on Trade. We discussed about standards for how to make regulation more transparent, those kind of issues. So maybe my view is maybe biased, but still, I will try to persuade. Maybe I don't have to persuade you, but TPP is a very important pillar of current Japanese administration's economic policy. As you may all know, 12 countries, including the United States and Japan, has agreed on TPP last October, and it was signed this February. TPP is very significant, important for many reasons. Number one, the size is very big. It covers 40% of total GDP of the world. So this is a very bold initiative to create a single economic unit in Asia-Pacific region. Its coverage, it covers not just tariff, but also try to set rules in very important new areas, such as intellectual property, e-commerce, digital commerce, how to manage state-owned enterprises. Those are very new issues, but very relevant issues for business. TPP has also strategic value. It means it's not just economic value, but it will contribute to long-term peace and stability of this region. Because TPP has both US and Japan in it, and we do not have a bilateral free trade agreement, TPP will certainly strengthen and deepen bilateral relationship between US and Japan. And also, I'm sure it will increase the presence of the United States in Asia-Pacific region. Finally, this is a so-called living agreement. So once it's implemented, other countries, if they are ready, can join the TPP. Already many countries, especially in ASEAN, like Indonesia, Korea, Philippines, Taiwan, Thailand, they have shown very strong interest. For Japan, joining TPP and agreeing on TPP was not a light decision. It was very, very difficult political decision. But we decided to support TPP because we believe TPP will sort of require us to tackle necessary important but difficult reforms, including agriculture, and we feel this is necessary for us for the future prosperity. TPP is also beneficial for Kansas as well. So according to the US government, let's read, $9.5 billion in goods exports from Kansas to TPP countries in 2014, including $828 million to Japan. 49% of Kansas goods export went to TPP countries in 2014, and about 1,700 companies from Kansas exported goods to TPP countries in 2013, of which 80% are small and medium-sized companies. TPP will eliminate all of the industrial goods of tariff and reduce tariffs on agriculture significantly. For example, we have very high tariff on agriculture. Beef, currently we have 38.5% tariff on beef, which will reduce to 27.5% when into force. And then it will reduce to further 16% in 9 years. It's not elimination, but it's very significant. We, Japan, have already submitted its implementation bill to the Diet, which is current in session. And yesterday, the Diet has decided to create a special committee to discuss TPP in the House, lower House. So we hope we will pass these implementation bills by the end of this Diet session, which is June 1st. And we strongly hope that US will follow suit so that we can implement this important agreement as soon as possible. By the way, Japan is negotiating with FTA with other countries as well. One of them is called RCEP. It includes ASEAN countries plus Japan, China, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and India. We are also negotiating with the EU. You are also negotiating. So when TPP was agreed, all of those negotiations has accelerated. However, it's now a little pausing because people are looking at the US situation. So if TPP is implemented soon, I assume those negotiations will be again accelerated. Then, negotiations of this agreement will be influenced a lot by TPP. So which means that TPP, the rules set by TPP will be very universal rules in many countries or in many areas. If TPP is not implemented soon, those negotiations may be stalled or, end up lower level agreement, which is not a good result for both Japan and the US. So I think the stake of the TPP implementation is very high. So those are reasons I think why TPP is very important and good thing for us. Finally, US and Japan fighting trade wars? Obviously not anymore. So last week, the US Bureau of Economic Analysis announced the latest figure of foreign direct investment to the United States. Japan invested $36 billion, which is the second largest sources of foreign direct investment. Second only to Luxembourg, which is, I understand, kind of hub country. Japan was also second last year too. And Japan's foreign direct investment to the United States have increased 5.5 times since 2009. And overall investment increased 2.6 times. So it clearly shows that Japanese companies have been aggressively investing in the United States. Japanese-owned firms employ 800,000 workers in the US, overall in the US, and invest $7.5 billion only in research and development, and export $70 billion from the United States. So the reality of the US-Japan relationship is much more matured and interconnected through investment than kind of old stereotypes based on the memory of trade friction between the two countries some decades ago. Actually, my job at the embassy, even it's just 6-7 months, clearly reflect this reality. Before, my colleague at that time in economic session was very busy negotiating with the United States about trade conflicts, how to solve problems. So we were like, fighting each other at the embassy and the government. Now it's very different. So in the past 7 months, we have received so many government officials, politicians, business people, academia, and to discuss their counterparts and others. Topics, very broad. Energy cooperation, high-speed railway, cyber security, defense industry cooperation, how to promote startups in Japan, global health, global climate, space development, and others. So every day we are discussing those issues. And virtually all of those issues, Japan and the US are on the same page. So our job at the embassy is further strengthen and deepen and broaden those relationships. One area which we feel we can still do more is to have more communication or connection with states and cities like Kansas or Wichita. by working closely with our colleague, Consul General or JETRO. So I appreciate today's opportunity very much. And I hope today's wonderful seminar will further promote trade and investment and friendship between Kansas, Wichita, and Japan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Kuroda. And I understand you're willing to take some questions?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yes?
yes.
Anyone?
I've been appointed to ask a question, I guess. First of all, thank you very much for coming to Wichita. It was excellent. Looking forward to your third visit. Secondly, thank you for your work on the TPP. That's a very important endeavor for both the U.S. and Japan. I've got kind of a general question and then a more specific question to our industry. I work for Cargill. We export beef to Japan, so we're very excited about the aggressive tariff reductions in TPP. So the general question is, it was touched on earlier, but what are some plans that Japan might have on the aging population 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road? What are they doing to take care of that? Obviously, there's going to be opportunities, like you talked about, for the pharmaceutical industry, but a beef industry where we're talking about consumption of beef, typically that is going to mean less of an opportunity. So overall, aging population, then more specifically, if you were a U.S. exporter of beef, and given potentially a declining or shrinking market despite the reduction in tariffs, what would you be doing as an exporter to either create more margin for your business or create more opportunity for your company in Japan?
Well, thank you very much. Very good question. Well, maybe the simple answer is maybe we should eat more beef. But seriously, there are some reports saying that elder people should eat more beef or protein than previous believed in Japan. In Japan, a while ago, it was believed that if you become older, you should reduce eating protein like beef, meat. But recently, many people are now saying that maybe we should eat beef more. So that's one way. Aging population or the declining population is a big challenge for us in many ways, for social security, for economic growth. So we've been trying to tackle this issue in many administrations. It's very difficult. There are some cultural, social background, economic aspect. Nonetheless, we think this is one of the most important challenges for us. So we will try to tackle this issue itself also. How to sell more beef? We Japan also produce very tasty beef, but it's different from your beef, my understanding. So Japanese beef are good for Japanese food. American beef is good for American food, or for some Japanese food as well. You have to also compete with other countries, like Australia. Now we have bilateral agreement with Australia. So the tariff for Australia will have already started declining. So you have to compete with them as well. Maybe you have to create some new dishes, best fit for your excellent beef. By the way, I was talking with my colleague that Kansas beef was famous in Japan a while ago, but recently we don't see a lot about Kansas beef PR. So maybe that's something you can do more. So did I answer some of your questions?
Thank you very much.